Well, hey everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, FSMA 204, How to Achieve Traceability and Transparency Along Your Supply Chain. And I'm Adrienne Bloom, Editorial Director of Food Safety Magazine, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's webinar. So I'd like to introduce our speakers to you. We have Joe Buckley, the Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance at Cisco Corporation. We also have Dr. Takashi Nakamura, Vice President of Corporate R&D and Food Safety at Del Monte Fresh Produce Company. And we also have Sarah Bradiger, Food Traceability and Food Safety Scientist at IFT's Global Food Traceability Center. So I will rejoin the presenters at the end to help answer your questions that come in throughout the webinar. So don't forget to submit those in that Q&A and chat section of the webinar console. And today's event is also being recorded and will be archived on food-safety.com.
Understanding the rule. So just a little anecdotal story, I'd like to go back a few months ago where I was visiting my brother and my nephew, Dane, who asked me to play a game of chess. Before I accepted the challenge, I reminded myself that I've not played chess in a very long time, and I've never been all that good at chess in the first place. But my nephew is only 6 years old, so how good could he possibly be? Well, he studies chess all the time. He beats my brother all the time, who's pretty good. And he is a state champion in his age group in the state of Texas. So after he beats me in 6 moves, I pick up my ego off the floor and I look at this prodigy and wonder, how did he get so good? Tons of time invested in understanding the rules and strategy. So like chess, FSMA 204 takes time and a great deal of energy to understand and prepare to meet the rule requirements. So for those out there that may have gotten a little bit of a later start in preparation, I encourage you to take advantage of the 30-month extension and do not underestimate the time it can take to prepare. Preparation starts with understanding the requirements of the rule, the terminology, and what type of critical tracking events or CTEs your organization is involved in. Look broad and deep at your entire organization and at your supply chain and understand what kind of data you receive from your suppliers and how you receive that data. Match it up against the key data elements required for the rule, and then see what is missing. For many companies, the missing pieces will be the traceability lot code and the traceability lot source. Look at how you can best receive that data and provide customers with that data that you ingest in your organization. The FDA website has a library of resources that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and there are many trade groups and industry associations out there that have great toolkits to help with planning and preparing for FSMA 204. I found the FDA exemption tool to be quite helpful when suppliers were not sure if they were exempt or not. So it's easy to find if you just do a quick web search, but the URL is at the bottom of this slide as well. So next I want to ask a polling question, and the polling question is coming up. And I'll give you just a few seconds to answer that. While I'm doing that, you might notice there's a chess table in the back of my office now. So next time I meet my nephew, hopefully I can at least last a little bit longer than 6 moves. All right, so supply chain, sales, operations, ITBT. Obviously, quite a few with 55% of supply chain. Looks like some answers are still coming in. 8% for IT and BT, 0% for merchandising, which is a little bit surprising. But depending on the business you're in, that could vary. Operations 14%. Sales 2%, corporate communications 1%, legal 3%, and executive leadership 18%. All right, thank you so much for participating in that. All right, so building the right project team. So obviously, FSMA 204 is a food safety and regulatory requirement. So some may assume it may fall primarily on food safety and quality assurance. Obviously, We had a lot of responses for supply chain, which is great. But however, a large-scale food distributor, an effective project team really needs to include representation and support from many other departments, such as supply chain, technology, merchandising, sales, operations, corporate communications, and legal. Having a cross-functional team that understands its functions, deliverables, is vital to the success of the project. Another key to success is having executive sponsors that can support key decisions and ensure that they understand business impacts across your organization. Also, it's important to identify external partners that can contribute to the success of your organization. I highly recommend getting plugged into as many industry trade groups and associations as you're able to participate in. Another area an organization may want to explore is if there are tech partners out there that can help them by providing platform or integration solutions if they decide they cannot or do not want to handle them internally. All right, so from the standpoint of a solution framework, from the distribution lens, obviously you've got to understand and set clear requirements from your suppliers, which may include identifying food traceability list items that they are sending, changing labeling requirements, and or sending some type of advanced shipment notice with all required KDEs or key data elements. From an internal perspective, as it relates to food distribution, there needs to be solutions put in place for intercompany and intracompany transfers, and of course, how that data will flow from receiving through shipping, as both of those critical tracking events are just a baseline. Then, if you are doing any type of transformation activities, a new traceability lot code and traceability lot code source must be applied to those cases as well. For the customer piece, your organization may want to consider meeting your customer where they are and being flexible to provide them with key data elements in a manner that works well for them. Finally, there needs to be a clear SOP for how to provide KDEs to the FDA when requested and how and what resources will be needed to do that in a 24-hour time frame, which is required. All right, looking at other ingredients to success. What are the key ingredients? So building a food traceability plan is a key deliverable for FSMA 204, not only because it's a requirement under the rule, but it gets you and your teams to realize what is needed from a holistic approach to solve for the rule. Master and transactional data are both key pieces to the puzzle, and there may be things that need to be done from that standpoint to optimize in both of these areas and ensure that your organization is ready for the rule. Things like ASN requirements, barcodes, and labeling expectations must be established and communicated out clearly to all stakeholders, giving them appropriate time to respond and prepare as well. For the tech portion of the solution, decisions need to be made like whether you're going to use internal resources or work with a third party who may have something already built that will meet your needs. All right, so what are some other additional benefits to traceability? Better traceability and better master data is just good for business in so many ways. Organizations, large and small, have so many items to manage. Managing those items is so much more difficult if the data lacks accuracy and standardization, leading to operational inefficiencies. With ASNs and better labeling, a company can potentially speed up receiving and or identify incorrect items in weights or product dates. Identifying these issues has the potential to save a company significant time, energy, and money. When there are product issues, this information can also pinpoint product origin and where it traveled in the supply chain, which not only helps from the food safety standpoint, but also can help reduce time and excess waste. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about our process and our preparation and these benefits. Next, I'll turn it over to Dr. Nakamura.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, Joe. And thanks to all those in attendance taking time out from their day to listen to different parts of the industry talk about how they're addressing FSMA 204 and compliance. So we're going to talk about how FSMA 204 and what we're doing as an organization as it relates to being a processor, but there's many different elements to that as well as we go through my section of the presentation. A couple areas that I'm going to talk about are, one, what do we plan on doing in light of what the FDA came out with the intention to extend beyond 30 days. I'm going to give you some examples of FTL, CTE, KDEs as it relates to a specific example. And then after that, I'll be talking through what we look at doing from a data management, how does GS1 fit into this, a little more in depth with regards to, as an organization, what we're looking at doing for FSMA 204 compliance. Now, before I get into the FTL list, I do want to say that when the notice or the intent to extend the compliance date by 30 months, our senior leadership is completely committed to onboarding, the integration, all of that from the original date, which was January of next year. So all of the work streams that we currently have, the project team that we exist today within our organization is full steam ahead. We're committed to having as much as we can on onboarding, the integration, the systems and processes that are needed to ensure compliance with FSMA 204. We have every intent to be in compliance with that by the end of this year. More to come on that, and we're obviously constantly in communications with our customers as well as our supplier base on how we are tracking against that. But for right now, we have all the support and the momentum from our senior leadership of supporting compliance by the end of this year. Now, all of you are familiar with the FTL that's been listed. It's been out there for quite a while from the FDA. One area that I do want to highlight is beyond the FTL, there are certain, and everyone gets stuck on this, like, well, my item's not FTL, so why am I having to comply with what you're saying you need to be in FSMA 204 compliance? And the main reason of that is if you look at supply chain from customer all the way from your supplier base, we're dictated by many different components of that. So in cases where we ask upstream to our supplier base of non-FTL items, that's usually more often than not being driven by our customers, and fairly big ones who are saying, you know what, in addition to these FTL items that we get from you, we also get these. In fact, we want full traceability as it's stated under FSMA 204 for everything that we get from you. So you're going to hear that a lot and see that a lot, and just like, well, my item's not on the FTL, so why do I have to do this? Well, it's more than often than not being driven by a customer, and these are not insignificant customers, right? So that's probably one of the main reasons why you're seeing items outside this being requested, CTs and KDs being requested from you. Now, one of the things that Joe also highlighted too was our project teams addressing FSMA 204 is very cross-functional. It's not just food safety, it's not quality, it's operations, it's sales, it's finance, it's procurement. And there's so many different elements that go across all these different functions. So it is not just one department that is to look at addressing this. This is company-wide. And I'm happy to say that level of engagement and cross collaboration between us has just been enhanced by initiatives such as this. And I hope that you guys, as other organizations look at onboarding, see the same, because the effort that the team does, the synergies that we're seeing, some of the opportunities to improve efficiencies have also come out. So it's also highlighted and made us work stronger as a team. Now, one of the things that, and this is one that I'm sure everybody has, what are the critical tracking events? What are the KDEs that are requested from this? One of the things that I do want to point out on this is that these are not individual discrete events for what your organization does. So for example, we at Fresh Del Monte, we can be a processor. We can also be a distributor in some cases. We can also, in some cases, go back all the way up to harvesting. So the scope of which, depending on the product, the season, who our customers are, can range. So it's not just like, oh, we're a processor and this is where we lie and this is what we have to commit to with regards to KDEs. It depends on our supply chain to our customer as well as our grower. So, that's one thing to consider as well, is that for those on the call, is that if you're a processor, you just, well, I'm just responsible for this. Well, no, it depends. Sometimes you own the contracts to the land, then you could be further up on the supply chain. You may also be involved with distribution to an account. Maybe you even own the brick and mortar for where your product comes out to. So there's just so many different nuances of this that you can't put yourself in just one bucket and silo yourself and think, I'm done. As we uncovered, we have a huge supplier base, equally large customer base, and just a spectrum of how we work with each. And so, and that's a challenge, but also the strength of having a cross-functional team that you work with on that. Let me go into this. So the next example I want to give is, let's say there is an outbreak investigation and FDA calls on, in this case, it'll be tomato. So what is the sequence? Well, FSMA 204 is traced back. So, right. So the establishment would be the one contacted or investigated in terms of an outbreak. Let's say, for example, somebody ate a salad at a restaurant and they want to see, and that's the common theme with regards to an outbreak. So they'll go back to the establishment, and from that, they'll go sequentially back in the supply chain to continue to delve and investigate each section. One thing that's important to remember on this is that, yes, while they're discrete, you as an organization may be covering several of these critical tracking events. So you may not just be the processor in this case. You may be also the processor and distributor, or in some cases, you may be all three, whereas 2, 3, and 4 may apply entirely to an organization like this. So one of the things that we were challenged with, and I've been involved with FSMA 204 compliance for probably about 4 years, and we have enlisted Trustwell's Food Logic system to actually be able to capture all of these key data elements, regardless of where you're at on the supply chain, so that we are effectively and timely manner being able to put all this information together in the case of an outbreak and subsequent recall on this. So one of the things that's really important to do is, and understand, is that you as an organization may be several of these little subcategories. So some may just say, I'm only responsible for 2. Some go, well, 2 and 3. And how that affects your organization and what information you need is going to be on a scrutiny level with how you work and deal from a commercial standpoint with your customers, as well as further up the supply chain with your growers. I do want to address that, GS1 has great initiatives which will greatly serve as tools. Now, I constantly get asked different questions about PTI labels, SSC labels, all that. All of them at this point are tools to help facilitate compliance with FSMA 204. But they may not necessarily have all of what you need, depending on where you're at on the supply chain. So again, that's just a lot of, that's cross collaborations, making you sure that you set up the organization or project teams in your organization to properly reflect that every touch point that the product may have is who you should have on this team to really make it effective. Because if you leave a function out, you could be actually missing out on a key element of compliance with FSMA 204. So with that, I will hand it off to Sarah. So thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Nakamura. I am going to be talking about traceability drivers globally, kind of beyond the scope of just FSMA 204, and then talking about some steps to build a strong traceability program. Before I get into it, I'm just going to introduce the GFTC real quick because we are not quite as famous as Cisco or Del Monte. So GFTC is a technology agnostic, science-based nonprofit voice on traceability topics. We were founded back in 2013 after completing a series of traceability-related FDA FSMA task orders. And at the moment, we work with a variety of partners, both public and private, to share knowledge, expertise, applied research, data, and resources, all in an attempt to help address global food traceability challenges and opportunities across the supply chain. So let's get into it. Traceability is a strategic enabler for a pretty wide range of initiatives. So on the commercial benefit side, it can be used to substantiate claims that differentiate products, reduce the cost of recalls and litigation, improve supply chain efficiency or reduce supply chain risk, and comply with regulatory requirements that allow for access into new markets or just continued access into the markets you're already in. On the public benefit side, it's pretty critical for reducing the scope and duration of recalls, limiting the impact of foodborne illness. That's kind of the objective for the FDA's food traceability rule. But it can also be used to prevent food fraud, reduce food waste, and track and monitor ESG goals. And historically, traceability has been seen as a food safety thing, something that's mostly just for recalls, but that's definitely not the case. And we're starting to see the food industry recognize that. I think we saw that given the number of people that said supply chain was responsible for FSMA 204 back in Joe's poll. Super excited to see that. Because the last 5 years of kind of wild supply chain issues, I think have thrown into pretty sharp relief that we need more visibility in global supply chains. And as the industry continues to set ESG goals, traceability becomes a lot more important. Because if we want to determine how sustainable a product is or how to quantify its GHG emissions, we have to be able to know where that product or its components were grown, how they were produced, how they were processed, how they were transported. You really have to understand the product's journey through the supply chain, and that requires traceability. Driving traceability across the global food system. Regs are pretty big drivers of implementation and adoption. Of course, the food traceability rule, or FSMA 204, is one of the most prominent and recognizable, but it is far from the only one. So our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, is working to revise and expand their seafood import monitoring program, otherwise known as SIMP, which requires traceability documentation for imported seafood products in an attempt to reduce the incidence of illegal seafood coming into commerce. In the EU, they've introduced a deforestation rule that will require businesses to ensure their products are not linked to deforestation. And this will drive traceability across a really broad range of food commodities because you'll have to be able to trace a product back to where it was grown in order to determine whether that land has been associated with deforestation. And there's additional efforts going on all over the world, whether they are directly related to traceability or kind of drivers of traceability like the deforestation rule in the EU. In the private sector, we see industry driving traceability as well, especially through ESG commitments and impact investing. So Walmart, for example, is committed to reducing 1 billion metric tons of GHGs by 2030. Cargill is committed to deforestation-free supply chains in a similar time frame. 2030 is a popular year. And even though these aren't necessarily traceability-specific commitments, as I said earlier, these organizations will need to be able to trace products through their supply chains in order to ensure that they are actually meeting these commitments and measuring their progress. We've also seen growth in impact investing, which is a strategy where capital is used to create both positive social or environmental impact, as well as a financial return for the investor. So one notable example for the food industry is FAIRR, F-A-I-R-R. I'm actually not 100% sure what the acronym is, but it's a global network of investors. They manage over 75 trillion in assets that aim to improve and de-risk the food system. So they've got substantial investment in seafood traceability right now, as well as some other engagements around product sourcing that will necessitate and drive traceability. So suffice to say, the need for traceability continues to expand and evolve. Okay, so now that y'all are hopefully hyped up about traceability and what it can do, how do we get started building a traceability program? There are some best practices. So first and foremost, having a clear scope and objective is super important. As I said, there's a bunch of different use cases for traceability, but different use cases require distinct data collection and analysis efforts. There's going to be foundational data that is common across every use case, every initiative, but there's still going to be some differentiation for specific things. So like the additional data elements you might need to meet regulatory requirements would probably look a little bit different from some of the like very specific internal data you would want to track and reduce waste within a single operation. And collecting, storing, analyzing, and sharing this data requires pretty significant resources, and it's really easy to crush a system under the weight of overcommitment. So having that really clearly defined objective and data management practices that align with that objective are crucial for the success of the overall system. 2, roles and responsibilities. Both Dr. Nakamura and Joe mentioned that this is a cross-functional effort. You need input and effort from a diverse set of stakeholders, and each stakeholder should be aware of what needs to be done, why it must be done, and how it's going to get done. So it's really important to define and communicate who needs to be responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Think RACI when it comes to the tasks required of all those stakeholders. And it's also really important to have defined structure of how your products flow through both internal operations and external supply chains, as well as how your data flows. You should be able to understand really easily how your products move through your system and how data follows them. Having established program maintenance is also really critical. So just as HACCP plans or SOPs or certification standards have to be reviewed and updated, so do traceability systems. It's important to have an established review cadence so that you can make sure your traceability program is still relevant to your business needs, adapting to any regulatory changes, technology development, or anything else that's really having an impact on the market. On the technology side, having digitization and interoperability is super important. Traceability has the potential to yield a lot of benefits, but just like executing traceability in general isn't really going to do a whole lot. In order to achieve those benefits, you're going to have to take the data, analyze it, and use it to better inform your decision-making process. So digitization allows you to take advantage of those data analysis tools and fully reap the benefits of the data that you're collecting. And it's important to choose technology that aligns with the objectives of the system and meets the needs of the users and the data collectors. So I think we've often seen systems that are really amazing for data collectors, but they weren't really equipped to share data, so the data doesn't really go anywhere. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've seen systems that are phenomenal for the data consumers. Maybe they're really good at getting, regulatory data over to whoever they need, buyer data, that kind of stuff. But they weren't necessarily built for people to collect data. And as a result, you have data gaps and the data isn't getting to the place that it needs to go. So when you choose a system, making sure it meets the needs of those who are going to collect the data and those who are going to consume the data is really critical. Now, given the volume of data that needs to be shared between hundreds of thousands of supply chain partners, it's also really critical that the data is standardized and that systems are interoperable. So interoperable systems allow information to be shared in a standardized fashion between different systems. So like imagine if a bank card only worked at an ATM of that very specific bank instead of any ATM around the world, or if a phone could only call another phone of that exact same make and model. That's kind of how the world would be without interoperability. And when traceability software solutions were first being developed, some systems required that all traceability data needs to be stored in one system, similar to everyone using the same bank or having the same phone. And while there has been a lot of improvement, we still see that model a little bit today with some supply chain actors requiring all of their suppliers to use the same traceability software to make data exchange easier, which works on a micro scale, but it really is not feasible when that model is applied to the whole traceability system. So we need to be able to have interoperable systems that can exchange data seamlessly because data sharing requirements are only going to grow. Lastly, consider data security and privacy measures as you're building your system. I think oftentimes people hear the word traceability and they think, okay, everyone is going to have all the data all the time, which is absolutely not the case. That's transparency. And you don't have to be, fully transparent if you don't want to. Traceability data can be trade sensitive, and it's really important to ensure that only relevant data is getting accessed by authorized parties. So design with security in mind. Okay, so those are best practices, but what can you do now and where can you start? First and foremost, gap analysis. I know our other speakers mentioned that, but you're going to hear it again from me. You should be thinking about what data you're collecting, what you need to be doing on an internal level, but you should also be thinking about gaps from a systems level. Traceability is a group project that involves an entire supply chain, and unfortunately, it's the kind of group project where no one person in that group can do all the work of the others. So it's really important to think about what the supply chain or the larger food system needs for end-to-end traceability and how you fit into that, how you can fill the gaps within your own responsibilities in that comprehensive system. And in order to do that, or to figure out what your role is in that big system, you really need to be collaborating. So food system actors should be working together to figure out how best to approach end-to-end traceability and compliance with regulations. So get active with trade associations that are relevant to your commodity or your sector. There's a bunch of them. Pick all of them that apply to you. There's quite a few that are working on sector-specific approaches to FSMA 204, as well as other regulations, because everything gets easier when we have a common, unified approach across supply chains, commodities, sectors, you name it. It's better if we are all using shared practices. Third, work on adopting data standards and interoperable tools. I know a lot of folks are investing in technology as they work to figure out what they need to comply with FSMA 204. So choose technology that is built upon standardized data and employs interoperable data exchange. GS1 is a great place to start when you're looking for standards. Last, plan for comprehensive investment. Traceability requires continued investment beyond the initial implementation. It's not just the price of software or kicking off those training programs. You'll need to be adjusting programs over time to reflect technology, market changes, operational needs, and you'll also have some long-term investment in user training, data governance, and technology and maintenance. You're still going to have IT for your system as long as it lasts. So think about long-term investment to make sure that system is resilient and durable over time. So some last thoughts to leave you with before we get into the Q&A. One, regulatory delays mean more time, but not less urgency. Foodborne illness outbreaks are not going to stop happening. And when they do, the FDA isn't going to take a break asking you for your data just because the food traceability rule is delayed. They're still going to investigate and we'll still have to give data. So it's important to make sure that we're still moving forward, making progress on traceability. Traceability is a strategic enabler. It can form the backbone of a wide range of initiatives. And you want to be able to take advantage of that data and make sure that it doesn't get siloed. Work cross-functionally so that you're not collecting the same data 5 times for 5 different tasks. And last but not least, get started now. Assess your operation, digitize your data, collaborate with your industry peers. Get started as soon as you can. And with that, I will kick it back to Adrian.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for such a great discussion and your presentations there. I really appreciate Joe and Dr. Nakamura sharing details on how their companies have prepared for traceability requirements and how they're working with their partners to ensure transparency along their different points in the supply chain. And thanks to Sarah for discussing some of the broader, more global drivers for traceability in the food system and details on why these capabilities are needed and how they can be addressed. So very comprehensive discussion there, and I really appreciate that from everyone. Now, before we have our presenters address some of your questions that are coming in, I'd like to remind you that we'd love your feedback. So if you saw that webinar survey pop up on your screen just now, please take a few moments to complete it. We always love your feedback. And now let's get into some questions. And as a reminder, you can continue to submit questions during the Q&A for our speakers. Now, let's see. I saw a question that came in earlier that I'd like to throw out here. Okay, so here's a good one to cover as like a fundamental understanding. And I'll throw this out to Joe just because I think it came in during your part of the presentation, Joe. So do all companies need to follow the rules provided with the FDA? So having data available in an electronic sortable spreadsheet in Excel, or are you allowed to have your own traceability systems in place for this kind of data?
All right, so I think what I'm hearing is just in terms of having the electronic version of the key data elements upon request for the FDA. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Yeah. I think maybe that's what they're asking. We'll go with that.
Yep. So there's been a lot of discussion on this and some of the trade group organization discussions that I've been a part of, and one of the things we talked about is the format. So it's not 100% clear, if there's going to be a specific format. From my understanding, things have to be in column A versus B, C, and so on. So we're talking about how we can align as an industry on best practices so that there's not 100 million different versions of the data out there in different formats. But yes, they're going to require that data and to be provided in a sortable spreadsheet. Not 100% clear on absolute definitive format, but the data needs to be there, and that's the baseline that we need to focus on now.
Okay. Thanks so much, Joe. All right, I'm going to throw out a question now for Sarah. So this attendee is asking, if you're a retail food establishment, what are some, I guess, guidelines or advice for how you can work with different tracking systems if you're under the FSMA 204 rule?
So yeah, that one has, I think, been a big challenge for just about everyone in the supply chain because we are not quite at a state of full system interoperability yet, like I mentioned. So right now, I would say as a retailer, you should be ensuring that your own system is either currently operating with data standards as their foundation or working with them to start using data standards so that you can say, hey, supplier, we are using, EPCIS, GS1, whatever, to collect and share traceability data, make sure your system aligns with that. So that way you don't have to tell them, hey, I'm using TrustWell, you need to use TrustWell. You can say, all right, pick whatever solution you want. Just make sure that it aligns with the same standards so that we can all use our own systems but share data seamlessly. And I think that too requires a lot of collaboration. Like I said, joining those industry initiatives to decide, okay, what data standards are we going to do? GS1, I think, has kind of like the gold standard as far as supply chain visibility standards. They're used pretty widely across the globe, but they have a bunch of different options that you can pick from. So it's important to kind of collaborate, gather consensus to say, all right, this is the approach we're going to take. This is the standard we're going to use. This is how we're going to format our data. And this is how we're going to share it so that we can all use our different systems, but still share seamlessly.
Okay, Sarah,
and prepare for a long road, I would say. It's not like an overnight process where you just call them up and be like, hey, let's do this tomorrow. Like, invest your time.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Sarah, for clarifying that. Okay, so next one, I'm going to throw out this question to Dr. Nakamura and Joe. So what advice would you give to companies who are just getting started now on their FSMA 204 journey? And I'll invite Dr. Nakamura to address that first.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating that question again?
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give to companies that are just getting started on their FSMA 204 and traceability journeys now?
Buckle up. So if they're just starting their journey right now, I think the first one is to identify a cross-functional team. And that's been reiterated by Joe and Sarah several times, as well as me through this. So, because it's not one unit. So if you're just starting now, I mean, it's getting finance, marketing, sales, all of that. Who is your customer base? Who is your supply base? What do you actually do in that whole supply chain? Are you somebody who's packing it? Are you somebody who actually is transforming the raw materials? Understanding what your organization does in that supply chain. And it may be different, right? So in some cases you may be like, oh, I only like, carrots come through and it just passes through and I give it to the end customer. Others may say, no, I actually make finished product out of these raw materials, transform it, and then it comes out. So it can be quite different depending on the customer, the type of product. Actually, what we've seen too, depending on who you source from and when you source, and how much you source also plays a factor in this. And none of that can be uncovered and dealt with effectively unless you have a good cross-sectional of the company in this project team. So I'd start off with that, and actually it probably is good to err on the side of over communicating and overly, I'm not to say staffing, but having many different functions representative, because they can always peel off if it's not relevant at this stage of what they're looking at doing or not. But it starts with that, and then once you do that, it's like, and what we've done is just basically customer by customer, supplier by supplier. What do you do? How do you engage with them? What are their expectations? Some customers are very clear what they want, right? The big chains are very clear of, this is how we want the data transmitted. This is what we require from you. Even if it's in the case, like I stated before, beyond the FTL. And then on the supplier base, do you own that land? Is that your own farm? Do you use a broker? Does that broker use different growers? And they do probably. And also, for, let's say, watermelon. Okay, well, I get it from grower A from this part of the season, grower B. So only those questions can come up and be addressed by having supply chain, procurement, sales team all engaged in those discussions. But first, it starts with putting together a cross-collaboration team, and then really business by business going through who does what for who to get to that customer. Some cases it may be a couple hundred. In some other cases, it can be thousands. And then the question becomes like, this is just so overwhelming. I just have so many customers, so many growers. We have disparate systems. More often than not, your organization captures key data elements somewhere. It may be on System X, somebody's notebook, somebody's laptop, but more often than not, it's being captured somewhere. So you do have to collaboratively look and investigate a system that is right for you, that will pull all that data from disparate systems together to allow you to be able to present it as the FDA requested in 24 hours in a electronic reportable format. Now, when it comes to size, when it's like I have a couple hundred customers, I have thousands of growers, I don't even know where to start. I have this project team together. Then I'd recommend what we've done is you do like block by block by block. I mean, it's kind of like you eat an elephant one piece at a time. So you have to have some way in the organization, and it may be different from how you do it, of prioritizing each block and making it manageable. So let's say you have 800 customers and 2,000 suppliers. Well, pull that down into like maybe 150 suppliers. Well, how would I prioritize that? Volume, complexity. Maybe they're outside the United States. Maybe it's through a broker. But every organization has to develop that criteria for prioritizing on their own. But that would probably be the next step, right? Because it may be in some cases that for those on the call, this is just too much. But then you got to start somewhere. So you just start in smaller blocks, prioritize based on criteria that you guys develop internally within the project team, and just go after one by one. And then obviously parallel that, or if you've not already done it, do so now, is can I put together a system internally that can aggregate and collect all this data from the different sources that we have within the company and externally, or do I have to go outside that and actually get another vendor to provide me that technical solution? That one, your organization needs to decide on that. But that's definitely going to be a key. You don't have to have it right away. The project team will eventually get to the point where they need to identify that, but it's certainly going to be something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. So hopefully that helps in terms of how do I go about doing this if I have done nothing right now. So Joe, if you have anything to add.
Yeah. Dr. Nakamura made excellent points. We talked about, industry trade groups quite a few times today, but you can, get plugged into, IFTA, FMI, GS1 conversations. You can learn so much from your peers out there. Also, just, the velocity of the items coming through your organization. At Cisco, we think of like all the different pathways between, our suppliers, and then, not just that, but, sister companies, things like that. There's so many different pathways where the product comes in, and that has to be managed because you've got to see those, KDEs flow along the way. You need a good solution, leveraging technology if possible to do that. You get the, critical tracking events like transformation in there. It just makes it that much more complicated to solve for. So understanding all of your critical tracking events that you're involved in or you're conducting, that's where you start to think about your solution. And what I don't think that we've talked about today that I think is huge is developing, if you're in the early stages of working through a solution, you want to get to a point where you can do some sort of proof of concept of the things that you think will work so that in fact, that those solutions are viable options for your organization. That's where we really learn and find, whether the things are going to pan out the way that we expect or if we're going to have to make additional adjustments along the way.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Nakamura. Joe. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to give some other insight into that. Is just there are tons. I mean, this is one example of a webinar. There's certainly other platforms and webinars that are go on. So it's not like you're truly starting from zero. I mean, I think from the knowledge that you may have of your own organization and who you source from and who you give your finished product to, along with a lot of work that's been done, not just by us, by others in the food and beverage industry. There's probably enough to pull from just so that you're not starting from zero. And certainly if you're not, I'm sure there's our information will be made available after this call. And I think one thing that's nice about this is that everybody is willing to help each other. I really haven't run into any. If you need questions on GS1, yes. If you have distributor questions, there's people like Joe and Cisco. If there's processors of food and beverage, whether it's us or other major companies, there's so many out there that are more than willing to share, like, hey, this is what we learned. This is the best practice that we have. Doesn't necessarily mean it's for you, but I think the willingness and openness that I've seen of industry partners and sharing what works, doesn't work, kind of lends itself that if you're at a point where it's just like, hey, I'm just starting, you're not really just starting. You got a whole ecosystem of food and beverage companies across a whole wide variety of raw materials and finished products that, at least for me, have been very open and transparent about what they've learned. So, and please reach out. I don't think any of us on the panel here are not open to having more dialogue if needed. And there'll be some, other sessions on this, a little more discreet, a little more, specific and prescriptive on certain scenarios that may happen and how, as an organization, that you may be involved and what you would need to do. But certainly reach out. I mean, the industry has been great in terms of really sharing best practices and what they've learned and what hasn't.
Great. Thanks for those additional thoughts. And certainly there's a variety of educational tools and a variety of discussions and networks within industry that are, as Dr. Nakamura said, ready to help, and including resources from FDA, which they put out a while ago. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to throw out a question, so we have some time still here. This is more of a technical question. I'm going to throw this out to Sarah, because I know I've seen questions kind of along this line and this nature of technical questions. It seems like everybody has one, but this question says, if a supplier has a verified kill step for an ingredient that's on the food traceability list, who's responsible for maintaining that information for an exemption to the traceability rule of FSMA 204? Is it the supplier or the producer?
So this one can be a little bit complex. The entity that's performing the kill step will have to maintain information that they did perform the kill step, and they should be collecting receiving data so that you can say, yes, I received this in and I performed the kill step. Once that kill step has been performed and the item is no longer on the food traceability list, then anyone farther downstream the supply chain of them is good to go. They don't need to think about it because they're receiving an item that isn't on the food traceability list. But for the entities that occur before the one that performs the kill step, that's where it can be kind of complex. So if you're not necessarily applying for an exemption, then you still do your normal FSMA CTs and KDEs. If you're shipping, receiving, whatever, you're executing as you normally would. But if you know that this item you're producing, say you're a tomato producer and you know your tomatoes are going to go into canned tomatoes, if you want to, you can have a written agreement with the next entity in the supply chain that says something to the effect of like, this product is going to go through a kill step. It will later be exempted from the food traceability list. And so therefore we don't need to be compliant with these CTEs and KDEs. You'll still have to do like 1 up, 1 down, basic traceability, like the subpart J rule isn't going away. But as long as you have that documentation in place, that agreement that goes through all those actors in the supply chain, then you're good. So kind of complex. It depends answer. And honestly, I kind of feel like it would be easier just to like not deal with that exemption at all, given that there are so many folks in the supply chain saying, hey, we want this data regardless of whether it's on the FTL or not, because we want to have one traceability system. But anyway, if that is something that you are looking into, there are, I know for sure at least the National Fisheries Institute and maybe a few others have put together like templates for those supplier agreements if that kill step exemption is something that you need to work through. So once again, go to your trade orgs for some additional resources.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. All right, we have time for about one more question here. And I'm going to throw out this question to the group, and whoever wants to lead off on it can go ahead. So do you have any tips or guidance for companies that are not subject to FSMA 204 because they don't produce or handle items on the food traceability list, but their customers are asking them to comply with the rule? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I will, from the standpoint that by default, most of our products fall within the FTL. So by exemption, we don't consider some others, or some do get back in because the customer says, I know it's not on the FTL, but it is. I think it's, at some point, our, traceability programs will continue to evolve. This is kind of one of those, what I consider like an accelerator to the current system. So if your organization is not subject to what FSMA 204 is requiring, I would certainly take these sessions and learnings from institutes and what you hear in the industry and see what you can do in your organization to be pushing for more continuous improvement. Because what I do see happening is that the FTL list, as I presented, that's not going to be a stagnant list. It is going to evolve. So it is what it is right now in 2024. It's likely going to change in 2026, 27. What that may be, I don't know, but it is going to evolve and change. At some point, it may start encompassing what products and ingredients that you guys do as an organization. We are demanding, the government's demanding, consumers are demanding more access to accountability, visibility, and transparency to our food supply chain. So I certainly don't think it's going to go the other way where things are going to take off the FTL list. It's going to get more expanded. So what I would tell organizations that don't have it right now, okay, but why would you stay stagnant? That wouldn't click with me. It's just like, why wouldn't you take this opportunity to go back to your organizations and say, hey, we don't have to get to the point where others who are on the FTL list have to be, but we should certainly start evaluating and evolving what our current programs are to be more of the standard of the culture and the science that's being put together and will be for the next 10, 15 years. So I would use this as an opportunity to go back to your organizations like, hey, I think there's opportunities for us here. There may be, and each organization will have bits and pieces that they'll take, and they don't have to take it whole place, but use this opportunity to kind of evolve and upgrade your own organization's food safety and traceability programs. So that's my feedback on that.
That's great insights. Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. Sarah or Joe, would you like to add anything before we wrap up here today?
I'll just say I will second everything that Dr. Nakamura said. I think the FDA did a really good job creating this framework that can be applied to other products. As he said, we expect this list to expand over time as new risks emerge, come about. And it is extensible, right? It's not solely designed with those FTL items in mind. You can use those data elements, those CTEs, those KDEs for other food products. I think the world is generally moving to that event-based traceability format with initiatives beyond FSMA 204. So yeah, there's no reason to stay stagnant. You might as well start moving on it now because it only gets harder to change as your operation grows and evolves.
Yeah, I would just add, you've got to do what's right for your organization and make that decision. But we talked about it a little bit earlier. There are, you know, you know, great benefits to having better master data, better traceability that can save the company money, and understanding what your customers are seeking to accomplish. You can, maybe find some win-wins there.
Great. Thank you all for that, those insights and those answers there to that last question. This has been a great discussion. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for Q&A today, but please join me once again in thanking Joe, Dr. Nakamura, and Sarah for their presentations. Now, if you have any other additional comments or questions, please don't hesitate to click that email us button on the console, and we'll share those with our presenters so they can respond directly to you. And if you didn't have a chance to fill it out earlier, that post-event survey you'll be redirected to it after the close of the webinar. And we do always look forward to hearing how to make our programs work better for you. Also, please make sure to visit food-safety.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation on demand that you can share with your colleagues, as well as other information about our upcoming events. And lastly, please save the date for our annual Food Safety Summit from May 12th to 15th, 2025 in Rosemont, Illinois. It'll give you the opportunity to connect with your peers, learn from and network with leading subject matter experts, and so much more. Registration for the Food Safety Summit is open, so please click the Food Safety Summit logo on the bottom right of the console for more information. And as a thanks for being a valuable webinar attendee, we'd like to offer you 10% off of your registration for the summit. You can use the code webinar25 at checkout. That's all together, webinar25. So we appreciate your time and hope you found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Hope you have a great rest of your day.